Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei fall in love with Tsubaki part 1. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video and also share this video with your friends. I have created my other videos playlist, there you can watch my all videos easily, check out as well. Let's start this video. It's okay, Issei. It'll be alright, go on ahead. Daddy and I will be right near you. The pretty woman with brown hair and warm brown eyes encouraged her son to go play with some of the kids. She lowered down to look at her child, who also had brown hair and soft innocent brown eyes. Issei Hyoudou hid nervously behind his mother, clutching her pants leg in shyness. He lowered his head to avoid detection from the people in the park. Hiromi Hyoudou crouched down and looked at her son with warm affection. Sweetie, don't be shy. I'm sure the other kids would like to play with you. Issei looked up at his mother and then he looked past her to see the kids enjoying themselves. With his mother's encouragement, the young tot slowly walked over to the crowd of kids. Pausing in his pace, Issei looked back at his mother, who gave him a warm smile and nodded to him. Looking back in front of him, Issei continued his pace. Hiromi smiled as she walked back to the park bench, sitting with a man with slightly spiky brown hair and brown eyes covered by glasses with square lenses. Mr. Hyoudou chuckled and crossed his arms as he watched his son attempt to interact with the kids. He looked over to his wife and his chuckling faded. Something wrong, honey? Hiromi looked over to her husband and she gave him a small smile. It's nothing. It's just our dear Issei. He's growing stronger. I don't know how or why, but he's growing far more powerful than I would have liked. Mr. Hyoudou adopted a serious look on his face and he sighed. Honey, you knew it would come to thigh. I know I did. Mr. Hyoudou widened his eyes at his wife's outburst. Hiromi's eyes were widened with anxiety and then her eyes softened as she calmed herself. I'm sorry, honey. Mr. Hyoudou put his hand on his wife's shoulder and he caressed it in reassurance. I know it may seem bad, but you don't need to worry about Issei. He's going to be fine. Hiromi sighed and smiled as she felt her husband's hand upon her. She looked over to see her son looking nervously at the amount of kids near him. It's just that the reason he is this way is because of me. Now don't say it like that, Hiromi. Granted, your physiology is much different from mine, but that doesn't mean Issei can't have a normal childhood. The signs have already been showing. But that's what I get for being a daughter of Zeus. Indeed, Hiromi Hyoudou was a daughter of Zeus, the king of the Olympian gods. Originally residing in Mount Olympus, when she reached of age, she traveled away in order to stay in the human world. As she stayed, she met Mr. Hyoudou. The two married sometime later, with Hiromi shortly revealing her status as a goddess of Olympus. Mr. Hyoudou, who was previously fascinated with the concept of Greek mythology, was surprisingly not shocked at all by Hiromi's revelation. As time went on, the Hyoudou couple bore a son by the name of Issei. Does Zeus even know that he has a grandson? Mr. Hyoudou asked. Hiromi nodded her head in response. He should. He can sense all of his children and the rest of his descendants. But it's not in his nature to actually track his family down. Mr. Hyoudou raised an eyebrow and then he sighed, looking over at his son. Hiromi looked over as well and she crossed her arms. He's so. Mr. Hyoudou looked over to his wife. He's extraordinary. To be honest, I think it's great that he will have a less than normal life. It might help him experience different things. Hiromi sighed. With my blood and one of the longiness in him, he's going to have a strange life. I just don't want him to get hurt. Mr. Hyoudou looked at his wife for a moment and then he sighed. The Hyodou's house. I'm so proud of you, honey. You actually played with some of the kids today. Did you have fun? Cooed Hiromi as she petted her son's head gently. Issei, now tucked in his bed, looked up at his mother and nodded silently. Hiromi smiled warmly and pecked her son with a kiss on his forehead. Sweet dreams, Issei. She walked away from her son's bed, turned his room light off, and closed the door, leaving it slightly open as a habit. Hearing his mother walk out of his room, Issei moved around in his bed and looked up at the ceiling. Closing his brown eyes slowly, Issei relaxed into a peaceful sleep. In Issei's mind. Issei opened his eyes and he looked around, not knowing where he was. He seemed to be in a completely black area. He adopted a nervous look on his face and he looked down at the spaceless ground. Ah, you're finally here. Issei jumped and his body started to shake. Humph. I never would have expected to meet you here so early. Seems like your growth rate in terms of power has allowed me to contact you. Issei took a step back as he looked up to see a large red Welsh dragon with green eyes. The child's eyes widened and he backed away from the amused dragon. It seems that my host is not much of a talker. Then again, you're extremely young. It is strange that I was able to contact you so early. The dragon rose its head at his new host, who looked up at him with an expression of fear. Rolling his green eyes, the Welsh dragon attempted to placate his host. Relaxing, child. I have no intention of harming you. After all, why would I? Outside of Issei's mind. Hiromi widened her eyes as she detected a huge surge of power within her son, and she quickly sprinted out of her room and ran into Issei's room. Her brown eyes widened in shock as she saw a crimson aura enveloping her son. Her eyes widened further. As she derived from Olympian heritage, Hiromi was aware of the gods and Buddhas, angels, fallen angels, devils, and more importantly, the dragons. She knew about the heavenly dragons, Great Red, and Ophis the Ouroboros dragon. The heavenly dragons were sealed into sacred gears, and Great Red and supposedly Ophis remained in the dimensional gap. According to what she heard from Mount Olympus, Drake had the shape of a red Welsh dragon, and the color of the aura enveloping Issei was red. Oh my goodness. So that means. Drake was sealed in the longinus within Issei. In Issei's mind. Who are you? The little Issei asked. Humph. Now you finally talk. The Welsh dragon suddenly looked up and he tilted his head. Hold on, kid. Outside of Issei's mind. Daughter of Zeus. Hiromi widened her eyes and looked around her son's room. Where did that voice come from? Ah, so you can hear me. Hiromi's eyes widened further. Is this Drake? You are correct. It seems that your son's power has finally increased to the point that I have been able to awaken and contact him. Hiromi blinked and then she sighed. Yes, it's true. He's strong, very strong. But it is to be expected as the grandson of Zeus. Your son has great potential, Hiromi. Hiromi frowned softly and sat on her son's bed. She reached and softly petted Issei's head. After leaving Mount Olympus, I just wanted to have a normal life and settle down. I had thought that when Issei was born, his human blood would cancel out my blood. But clearly it didn't work out as I had hoped. Daughter of Zeus, when Issei grows, he will not have a choice in the future of encountering the supernatural. There will be more to come, and the way he is now, despite his tremendously vast level of power, he will have a hard time as he dwells in the world of the supernatural. Hiromi's frown morphed into a saddened look of worry. I just don't want him to get hurt. I offer my sympathy. I also do not wish to put my host in any harm. That is why I am speaking with you now. With my power in his disposal, I will be able to help your son. However, my power will not be enough to help him survive. He will need the assistance of someone other than myself. The daughter of Zeus put her hands on her face, sighing deeply. Removing her hands, she looked at her son worriedly. He's so innocent. Innocence is a virtue. For him to be exposed to the world of the supernatural, I don't know what will happen to his personality. I don't want to lose my son. Tears started to fall from her eyes, and she reached for Issei, hugging him tightly. I can't lose him. More tears started to fall down from her eyes. Drake remained quiet in respect, and after a short while, Hiromi quieted her crying, while still holding on to her son. You will not lose him, daughter of Zeus. He still has an opportunity to protect himself. Hiromi closed her eyes and sighed, her eyes growing wet with more tears as she looked at her sleeping son. My precious son. Mount Olympus. Mommy? Asked Issei. Hold on, sweetie, mommy has to concentrate. Hiromi told her son. Hiromi narrowed her eyes as she looked around her surroundings. In front of her stood a vast palace on top of a mountain with crashing waves. Above the large palace was the gray and golden colored sky. Issei looked up nervously at the sky and the palace. Hiromi sighed as she walked Issei inside the palace. Issei looked up in awe at the amount of crystal mansions. Hiromi looked around nostalgically and remembered that she used to live here. Walking in front of a gigantic door, Hiromi pushed the door open, revealing an elderly man, albeit with a great muscular physique. His eyes were pure white and he was dressed in a white toga with golden arm guards. Hiromi sighed again as she walked forward to the man and she stopped in front of him. Issei looked up at the unfamiliar man. The man smiled as he peered at Hiromi. Well, if it isn't my lovely daughter. Hiromi lowered her head as she looked up at the man. Hello, father. Zeus, the king of the Olympian god, smiled as he looked at the young boy next to Hiromi. Who is this little fella? Hiromi looked down at her son, who gripped her pants leg. She patted his head gently and looked back up at Zeus. This is my son Issei, father. Your grandson. Zeus widened his eyes. Oh, is that so? And why have you brought him here? You've made yourself clear that you wish to stay in the human world. So why have you brought my grandson to Mount Olympus? Hiromi gulped and she sighed once more. It only took a couple of minutes, but Hiromi was able to explain the situation to her father about Issei. Zeus nodded his head as he listened to his daughter's explanation, all the while shifting his wise eyes to his grandson. I see. Getting up from his throne, Zeus walked over to his grandson, who backed away slightly as he stood close to his mother. Zeus smiled warmly. There is no need to be afraid, Issei. I'm your grandfather, Zeus. I must say for such a little tot, you have a tremendous amount of power within you. Perhaps even greater once you learn how to train it. Issei hesitantly looked up at his grandfather and then he looked up at his mother, who gave him a warm but sad smile. It'll be alright, sweetie. Your grandfather's going to help you. 12 years later, at the training center of Mount Olympus. A young man with brown hair, soft yet firm brown eyes, and a muscular and toned physique quickly dodged a bolt of lightning from Zeus, the ruler of Mount Olympus. On the young man's left arm was a red claw-shaped gauntlet with yellow accents and green inscriptions. Partner, perhaps it is time to use the improved form of your balance breaker. The young man narrowed his eyes as he listened to the Welsh dragon sealed in his sacred gear, also known as the boosted gear. Sounds like a plan. The young man lifted his arm up. Welsh dragon over booster. Welsh dragon balance breaker. The crimson aura enveloped the young man, with a dragon armor manifesting and clasping onto his body. The green jewels embedded within the armor glowed as the power of the young man increased greatly. Zeus smirked at the young man and he charged a bolt of lightning that was much larger and far more powerful than the one before. So you're resorting to your scale mail, huh? Very well, come at me, my grandson. 2 hours later. Issei Hyoudou narrowed his eyes as he faced his opponent. He stood in a battle position, with his sacred gear unseen, sealed within his body. A vigorous fire-breathing monster that had the frontal body of a lion, horns of a goat, and the tail of a serpent, growled deeply at him. Moving slowly on all fours, the creature rapidly whipped its tail over to Issei, who dodged it by jumping over it just in time. Landing on the ground, Issei quickly grabbed the creature's tail, and using the creature's weight to his advantage, he swung the creature around. He let go, causing the creature to soar throughout the area, crashing into the wall. The creature quickly got up, shook its head, and charged towards Issei. It lowered its head, intending to puncture Issei with its horns. The young man thought quickly and grabbed the creature's horns, gripping his hold tightly. With little effort, Issei pulled the horns off of the creature, causing it to squeal out in pain and anguish. Recovering from its pain, the creature growled and breathed out a massive wave of fire. Issei narrowed his eyes and he charged towards the creature, going through the vast waves of fires. As he got closer, Issei lifted his hands, holding the horns of the creature. Within seconds, he got closer to the creature and with a swipe of his hands, Issei impaled the creature's head with its own horns. Hearing the last squealing cries of the creature, Issei walked away from it, looking at his hands, which were covered in the creature's blood. His firm eyes gained almost a saddened look and then he continued his pace. 1 hour later. Issei looked around his surroundings, focused on trying to sense his enemy. Closing his eyes, he concentrated without interruption. Suddenly, a shadow formed under him and Issei opened his eyes and jumped away just in time to avoid an explosion from the ground. Immediately settling himself into a battle stance, Issei looked up to see an eyeless figure with decaying flesh and bladed arms. Under its waist was a cloud of black smoke. The ghost-like creature moved to strike Issei with its bladed arms. Issei quickly maneuvered out of the way and stomped on the blades, trapping them into the ground. As the creature struggled to free itself, Issei raised his fist back and sent the creature up into the air with a powerful uppercut. Jumping up into the air, Issei grabbed the creature by its head and slammed it onto the ground, bashing its head into the cracks repeatedly. The young man then grabbed one of the creature's bladed arms and with a quick slash, he decapitated the creature, ending its existence. Staring at the creature for a moment, Issei lifted his hand, charging a sapphire sphere of energy. Looking away with his eyes closed, he shot it at the creature, destroying every trace of its existence. Looking around the training area, Issei looked up at the ceiling and sighed. I wonder if Uncle Hephaestus is finished yet. The Gore of Athens. Well, if it isn't my nephew. I'm almost done with your gift, so just wait for a moment. Issei nodded as he watched his uncle craft a new artifact for him. Over time, Issei had been training with his grandfather and the monstrous creatures of Mount Olympus. As Issei grew, so did his power. Zeus himself had stated that Issei's power was still fluctuating. Even by a demigod standards, Issei's power was absolutely monstrous and it still continued to grow. Despite his immense power, Issei did not have a bellicose or aggressive personality. Outside of battle, Issei maintained the personality of a benevolent kind, yet shy young man. When he participated in battle however, Issei was extremely serious, preferring not to waste time and to just finish the clash as soon as possible. His grandfather told him that he could enjoy a better fight if he held back his power in order to prolong it further. Issei was hesitant about his grandfather's advice, and so, he suppressed the thought. As he trained with his grandfather, Issei had also come to friendly terms with a heavenly Welsh dragon known as Dreg. Over time, Dreg had helped Issei become familiar with the topics of the supernatural, such as angels, fallen angels, devils, and dragons. According to the Welsh dragon, dragons were beings created by huge masses of energy and acted freely selfishly. In the past, Drake had a rival by the name of Albion, the Vanishing Dragon. However, their rivalry was interrupted by the three factions. Later on, the bodies of Drake and Albion were destroyed and placed into two separate sacred gears. Hey, Issei. It's ready. Shaking himself out of his thoughts, Issei looked up at his uncle. His eyes widened at the sight of his new artifact. A blade held a design featuring a devil-like horn shape and a pattern of golden stripes on the surface of the blade. Hephaestus lowered his hand containing the blade and handed it to Issei. Grabbing the blade from his uncle, Issei peered at the new artifact and traced his finger onto the blade. 1 hour later, training center. The cyclops-like creature with undead characteristics growled menacingly as it walked towards Issei. Issei, holding his new weapon, looked into the eye of the cyclops. With a roar, the cyclops charged towards Issei, and the young man avoided the cyclops' attempt to attack him, and he embedded his blade within it. Embedding his blade deeper, Issei concentrated his power, and the blade suddenly emitted a vast pool of fire before the cyclops combusted from the immense pressure. Releasing his blade from the creature, Issei jumped off of the cyclops, walking away as it disintegrated from the fire. In Zeus's domain. The high school. Issei blinked as he stood in front of his grandfather. After he was done training, his grandfather had called him in order to discuss something important with him. Zeus nodded and sighed in response to his grandson. Indeed. To be honest, Issei, your power has already increased greatly, so the training you endured has paid off. Your mother wishes for you to attend school. I, for one, don't really mind it. What do you think? Issei looked down as he considered his options. His mother did want him to meet new people and it would help him be more sociable. I guess it can't be too bad. It's gonna take some time for me to get used to the new experience. Relaxing, partner. Besides, anyone who possesses the power of dragons is a chick magnet. Especially in your case, since you just so happen to be a demigod as well. You'll survive. Issei widened his eyes as a light blush formed on his face. That doesn't exactly reassure me, Drake. Oh, lighten up, kid. You can destroy many monsters with little to no effort, and yet you get nervous about the subject of young women. No offense, but you, my host, are what mortals would call a socially awkward hero. Issei frowned softly at the name given to him by Drake. Guo Academy. Issei stood at the gates in front of his new school, praising the appearance of it. As he looked around his surroundings, he noticed a large crowd of students occupying the school grounds. He looked up at the sky, and he sighed. Something troubling you, partner? There's a lot of devils residing in this school. I don't want to pay too much attention to myself. Interesting. Humph, that does seem to be a pet peeve of yours. Having attention all on you. So are you going to reveal your power or not? Issei closed his eyes as he suppressed his power, so that he would calm himself. Like I said, I don't want too much attention. I don't really have any prejudice against any angels, devils, or fallen angels. I just once I want to have some normalcy in my life. Humph, whatever you think is best, my host. Just so you know, you alone are abnormal. The aspects of the supernatural will catch up to you eventually. Issei lowered his head, and he sighed, rubbing the back of his head, a habit he had gained a while back. He looked up at the gates, and sighed once more. I know. I guess I will just have to put up with it. The school bell rang, indicating that class was now over. Issei sighed as he picked his bag up, looking around the classroom. Sighing again, he walked out of the classroom and into the hallways. As he walked ahead, he noticed some of the girls of Kuo Academy shooting him some glances. Very suggestive glances. He lowered his head and looked ahead, feeling a little uncomfortable at the glances he was receiving. Partner, calm yourself. They're just girls. Mortal girls, no less. I know, Drake. I'm just not used to being the one stared at. For a powerful being, you sure are modest and introverted. The young man sighed as he rubbed the back of his head in habit. Walking outside of Kuo Academy, Issei stopped near some nearby trees. Sitting down onto the ground, Issei crossed his legs as he watched the students walk away from the school. Tilting his head, Issei laid against a tree into a relaxing position. The day wasn't bad at all. Don't you agree? Issei adopted a thoughtful look on his face as he looked up at the sky. I guess. Although I can't help but get the strange feeling that someone was watching me all day. It's kind of unsettling. Someone, or something. Let me rephrase that. I think some of the devils in the school were actually watching me today. But I don't know why. I made sure to suppress my power so I would remain undetected. Hate to tell you this, kid, but because you're a demigod, you have a desirable scent. And it's able to be tracked. After hearing that, Issei sighed and crossed his arms. Well, so much for normalcy. I just hope. So, you are my new cowhide. Oh, find me in the Alps. What? Sorry, it was something I watched earlier on. Issei looked up to see a beautiful buxom woman with long crimson hair and blue-green eyes. She was dressed in the Kuo Academy girls' school uniform. Issei started to feel a sense of nervousness as he detected something strange in the girl's eyes. The young man didn't want to know what that look in the girl's eyes signified. The girl gave Issei a warm smile as she crouched down to him. "Issei Hyoudou-kun. It's nice to meet you." Issei looked at the girl and he lowered his head slightly. "It's nice to meet you too. The girl smiled wider. "My name is Ria's Gremory. Was your first time here enjoyable?" Issei looked down again. "Might as well answer her, partner. Devil or not, she doesn't seem to be hostile. Then again, if she were to harm you, it'd be pointless on her attempt anyway." Listening to the Welsh dragon, Issei looked up at the crimson-haired devil and nodded. "It was okay. I can't complain." The two remained quiet until Ria spoke up. "I was wondering if you would come with me, perhaps somewhere quieter." Issei blinked and he tilted his head. "I don't know. Is it really that important? I don't mean to sound rude, but..." Ria's smile grew warmer. "Such a sweet boy. The Occult Research Club." Issei widened his eyes as Riaz walked him towards the Victorian-styled building. Opening the door, Riaz and Issei walked inside and the former closed the door behind them. Watching Riaz walk away from the door, Issei widened his eyes further as he saw 3 more students occupying the room. The buxom beauty with black hair tied in a ponytail and violet eyes looked over at Issei and she smiled at him. "Come and sit down, Ice-kun." Issei looked over to Riaz, who directed her hand toward a couch. Issei looked around the room and compiled, sitting down onto the couch. Riaz smiled as she sat down across from him and crossed her arms. "You're probably wondering why I called you here." Issei blinked and rubbed the back of his head. "Yeah, a little bit." Riaz chuckled and then she set her face into a mysterious smile. "Your scent is very strong, Ice-kun. I could smell it all the way from inside the school." Issei widened his eyes. "Is my scent really that powerful?" "Unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever works. Since you are aware that you are a demigod and the fact that you are a grandson of Zeus, who is known as a very powerful Olympian god, your scent is extremely strong. So that's how they were able to find me directly. You sure can't catch a break, can you, partner? So then you already know." Riaz smiled wider. "That's right. Although your lineage is something I'm not aware of." She straightened her position in her seat. "As I've said before, my name is Ria's Gremory. I'm an heiress of the Gremory clan." She directed her hand behind herself. "These students are a part of my peerage." She pointed to the black-haired girl with violet eyes. "This is my queen, Akeno Himejima." The Keno's smile grew warmer as she waved at Issei. The young man's face flushed in response. Riaz then pointed to a young man with blonde hair and gray eyes. "This is my knight, Hyoudou Kiba." Hyoudou lifted his hand up and waved it towards Issei. "And this is my rook Kaneko Taoju." Riaz pointed to a petite girl with white hair and hazel eyes who nodded silently to Issei. Issei nodded quietly and looked around the room. Riaz giggled as she looked at her newfound cowhide. "You look so nervous, Ice-kun." Issei rubbed the back of his head. "It's nothing to do with you guys. It's just that I'm not usually the type of person to meet new people." Riaz smiled wider and nodded as she understood Issei's words. Although, that scent of his was absolutely irresistible to her. "The Gremory devil is giving you a strange look, partner. Might want to guard yourself." Riaz narrowed her eyes as she stared at Issei and her gaze became serious. "Hyoudou. Kaneko." "Yes, but you." "Understood." Hyoudou narrowed his eyes as he placed his hand on the ground and a number of swords manifested and shot towards Issei. Issei widened his eyes at the motion, but he remained still. The swords shot towards Issei, but suddenly, as soon as they came in contact with the young man, they shattered into nothingness. Hyoudou widened his eyes in surprise at the scene he had just witnessed. Behind him, Kaneko shot forward, landing a punch to the still shocked Issei. The room of the Occult Research Club was completely silent. Issei remained where he was, blinking as he noticed Kaneko with her fist planted on his stomach. The white-haired girl widened her eyes as she felt a sudden pain in her arm and she retracted herself from Issei, who continued to sit on the couch in silence. Ria's eyes widened slightly, not showing surprise, yet showing a bit of interest. He didn't even attempt to defend himself, and yet Hyoudou's sacred gear and Konkyo's strength didn't even faze him. Issei blinked repeatedly in confusion and rubbed the back of his head. "I'm so lost right now. Try to release some of your power. Not all of it, but some of it." "Why? Just do it, partner." Complying with the Welsh dragon's orders, Issei closed his eyes and released only a small measure of his power. Immediately after, Hyoudou and Kaneko fell to their knees and Riaz and Akeno both widened their eyes in amazement. Riaz felt her legs going a bit numb. His aura of power. It's almost frightening. "I don't know if I should be assuming this, but the level of power he's showing, it's almost close to that of an ultimate class devil. And yet, he's still a child." Issei relaxed and opened his eyes, restraining his power once more. Ria sighed as she felt the heavy pressure disappearing from the area. She definitely had to tell Sona about their new cowhide. Relaxing into a more comfortable position, Ria smiled and composed herself as she spoke up. Ice-kun, I. Knock knock. The crimson-haired devil widened her eyes as she looked over to the door. Come in. The door opened revealing a new crowd of students. Issei widened his eyes as he sensed the energy of the newcomers. So many devils. Ria smiled as she looked at the girl with black hair styled in a bob cut and violet eyes covered by red glasses. Behind her was a girl with knee-length black hairstyles with split bangs and light brown eyes covered by blue semi-rimmed glasses with square lenses. Behind her were several other students. Sona, what brings you here? The girl with the bob-cut hairstyle smiled at her friend. I sensed something peculiar in this room. I also detected the very same scent I could smell earlier on today in the school. And I believe I found it. She set her violet eyes towards Issei, who blinked in confusion. You seem to attract a whole number of devils, partner. Specifically, the women. Humph, he doesn't look like anything special to me. Issei turned to look at a young man with short blonde hair and grey eyes, who shot him an arrogant glance. The blonde-haired young man looked up at Riaz. Riaz, don't tell me you've already turned the new guy into a devil. Riaz gave the young man an unreadable look until Sona turned to face him. Now Saji, don't be rude and assume things. Sona set her eyes to Issei. Issei Hyoudou-san, how do you do? My name is Sona Citri. The girl with blue semi-rimmed glasses walked up and introduced herself next. My name is Tsubaki Shinra. Then a white-haired girl with blue-green eyes introduced herself. Momo Hanakai. Next was a slim girl with long brown hair that ended in two short braids and matching eyes. Ryaka Suka. The girl with shoulder-length reddish-brown hair and brown eyes walked up and smiled. Nice to meet you. I'm Tama Meguri. The girl with blue shoulder-length hair and matching blue eyes, along with a Bishounen face, put her hand on her chest. Tsubasa Yura. Lastly, a short petite girl with brown hair and twin ponytails and green eyes walked forward. Haruko Nomura. Sona smiled as the last member of her peerage was introduced. She looked over to Issei, who blinked at the amount of devils in the room. There's so many people here. Riaz giggled and she looked over to Issei. Ice-kun, there's something I want to ask you. Issei turned to look at her and blinked. Riaz smiled. Do you know what the evil pieces are? Issei widened his eyes at the familiar topic. When he was younger, both Zeus and Drake had informed him that the evil pieces were created by Ajuka Beelzebub, one of the four great satans. Because of the devastating great war between the three factions, which had also caused the countless lives of devils. It was based on chess, with the total being 15 pieces. There was 1 queen, 2 rooks, 2 bishops, 2 knights, and 8 pawns. Issei lowered his head as he had the feeling he knew what Riaz was going to ask him. And to be honest, he had no intention of joining any peerages. He was already abnormal to begin with and he really had no desire to become a devil. Plus the fact that he had just met Riaz and the rest of the devils not too long ago. He had just met them for Pete's sake. Not that he had any prejudice against any of the devils. He just had no desire to involve himself in a peerage. Issei looked up at the crimson-haired devil and he sighed. I do, Gremory-senpai. But I know what you're going to ask me. And although I'm a little surprised that you would ask me at all, I just have to say this. I don't want to join your peerage. Riaz, Sona, and their peerages widened their eyes a little. Issei lowered his head again. It's nothing to do with you, Gremory-senpai, or Himejima-senpai, Kaneko-san, and Hyoudou-san. He looked at Sona and her peerage. And neither you, Citri-senpai, Shinra-senpai, and the rest of the peerage. It's just that I'm already something that's unusual. Becoming a devil would just change me once again. Riaz looked at her cowhide, and then she sighed. And here I was so close to getting a powerful ally for myself. Although I have to respect my cowhide's decision. He won't join my peerage, but I do get to see him at school. Smiling warmly, Riaz placed her hand on her chest. I respect your decision, Ice-kun. Issei nodded his head and he got up from his seat. As he walked towards the club door, he turned back around to face Riaz, Sona, and their peerages. It was nice meeting you all. We'll see each other in school. Opening the door, Issei exited out of the occult research club. Riaz put her hand on her cheek as she pondered, and then she smiled. Well, his reasons were valid. Perhaps I had rushed a bit. I'll be watching him while he attends here. He may be able to suppress his power, but that scent of his. She gained a glazed look in her eyes. But that scent of his, it won't be hard to find him. Bakeno stared at the door and a smile grew onto her face. Such a shame, he's such a cute young boy. I would have loved to spoil him. But he can't hide that easily. That scent of his is so overwhelming. A small blush formed on Akeno's face as she giggled softly. Tsubaki sniffed slightly as she tried to detect the remaining scent of Issei, and a light blush brightened onto her face. She narrowed her light brown eyes as she tried to force her blush down. Outside of Kuo Academy. Issei Hyoudou? You're from Kuo Academy, right? Issei sighed inwardly as he stopped in his pace. He hadn't even made 3 steps onto the bridge and yet another presence was calling for him. He turned around to see a girl with black hair and violet eyes, dressed in a much different uniform from the ones the girls wore from his new school. Issei tilted his head at the girl and then his eyes widened as he detected her energy. Fallen angel. What is she doing here? Did she detect my scent too? It's not exactly impossible, partner. Why yeah, I just enrolled into this school. Why did you need anything? The girl smiled as she walked closer to Issei. Yes, there is something I wanted to ask you. As soon as she got closer to Issei, a glazed look appeared in her eyes and her legs started to shake. Issei widened his eyes and he took a step back. The girl shortly recovered and she gained her composure. Sorry about that. I guess I'm a little woozy. I just wanted to ask you, would you go out on a date with me? Issei widened his eyes once again and he rubbed the back of his head. This fallen angel barely knows me. Humph, don't be such a naive partner. She's planning something. Keep your guard up. Issei settled himself and he straightened his stance. Sorry, but I'm not really looking to date anyone. I don't really know you either. I'm sorry. He turned to walk away until the girl walked closer over to him. And no, wait. Please hold oh. She cut herself off as her eyes glazed over once again. Issei widened his eyes and he gained an almost nervous look. Gosh, is my scent really that strong? She's stumbling over her words by just sniffling your scent. Remember kid, fallen angels are known for having impure thoughts. That's kind of disturbing, Drake. Only you would find it disturbing, partner. Issei looked up at the girl to see her violet eyes still glazed, her speech almost diminishing to mumbling. Getting a little uncomfortable and a little bit creeped out, Issei backed away. Sparks of pure lightning surrounded his body and Issei warped away, his body disappearing away. Losing track of the enticing scent, the girl recovered once more and her violet eyes widened before narrowing darkly. Curse him and that delicious scent of his. I'll just have to try again next time. Issei's house. Issei sighed as he walked into his room. He dropped his bag onto his bed and sat down. Looking up at the ceiling, Issei laid himself down, placing his hands behind his head. His eyes gained a saddened look and he closed them, ready to go into a peaceful nap. Humph, you've only been to that institution of yours for a day and yet you've already acquired the attention of some of the female devils. Kuku. You sure are an interesting host, Issei Hyoudou. The next morning. The light from the sun shone through the window, its brightness shining onto Issei's face. His eyes opening slightly, Issei rubbed his face and he reached for his alarm clock so he could check the time until he felt something soft. Fleshy, even. Brown eyes shot wide open in shock and Issei immediately shot out of his bed. His eyes widened when he saw who was in his bed. No. What he saw was the familiar crimson red hair, the rather large bust, and the voluptuous curves covered by the bed covers. Issei recognized this girl immediately and he wouldn't have been so anxious had it not been the fact that the girl in bed was naked. That's right, Ria's Gremory was naked. In his bed. And she was sleeping peacefully, as though she was completely relaxed. Issei backed away slowly, unable to believe what he was seeing. Why is Gremory senpai in my house? As much as he wanted to know why, Issei didn't really want to wake the crimson-haired devil up. He had no idea why Rias was in his house and in his room, sleeping naked in his bed. He was glad that she hadn't woken up yet. Gulping nervously, Issei went to the bathroom to change into his day clothes. Walking out of the bathroom, Issei paused in his pace when he saw Rias move about in his bed. The crimson-haired devil opened her blue-green eyes and lifted her body up, relaxing into a comfortable position. She emitted a soft yawn and blinked several times and looked at the still uneasy Issei, smiling at the look on his face. Good morning, Ice-kun. Issei didn't reply. He merely maintained his confused yet puzzled gaze. Not knowing how to handle the situation, Issei rubbed the back of his head in habit. Sighing, Issei quickly removed his eyes from Ria's body, looking at the wall. What are you doing here, Gremory-senpai? Rias giggled and sat up on Issei's bed. I just came to check up on my new cowhide. Issei widened his eyes. Check up on me? But why are you naked? Actually let me rephrase that, how did you even find out where I live? Ria smiled and crossed her legs. Issei then widened his eyes and palmed his face. I scent. Of course, dumb question. Speaking of scents, I need to talk to Grandpa about that. He might know what's going on. Rias giggled and tilted her head. I don't mind it if you look at me, Issei. You don't have to be so nervous. Issei shook his head and maintained his gaze at the wall. I'm not that type of person, Gremory-senpai. Rias narrowed her eyes but smiled as she got off of the bed. She walked over to Issei, placing her hand on his cheek. Such a modest boy. She chuckled and petted his cheek and went to pick up her clothes off the floor. Issei kept his gaze on the wall and crossed his arms. Humph, you do know any man in your situation would have jumped in excitement at the sight of a naked woman. Clasping her bra on, Riaz turned around to face Issei, who was still facing the wall. Smiling warmly, Riaz put the rest of her uniform on and tilted her head. He's so innocent. He sure is adamant to avoid looking at me. You can now look at Ice-kun. Hesitating, Issei turned around and his stance relaxed as he saw that Riaz wasn't lying to him. Riaz smiled wider and walked over to him. What were you planning on doing today? Issei widened his eyes and looked at his calendar on the wall. Saturday. He sighed and lowered his head. Which means no school today. I need to talk to Grandpa Zeus about this whole scent nonsense. The fallen angel from yesterday kept mumbling, and to be honest, it kind of creeped me out. But I don't want Gremory-senpai to follow me around. He looked up at the smiling Riaz. I'm visiting a few relatives today. I haven't seen them for a while, so I might be with them all day. Riaz widened her eyes a little. She was hoping she could find out more about her new cowhai. But she would always find the opportunity to go see him whenever he was at school anyway. Plus she knew where he lived, so that was a bonus for her. She didn't want to bother him more. Alright, Ice-kun. Enjoy yourself. Nodding cautiously to the crimson-haired devil, Issei went to reach for his room door until his eyes widened as he remembered something. He turned to look at Riaz. Gremory-senpai, you never really answered my question. Why were you naked in my bed? Riaz gave Issei a mysterious smile, and then she chuckled, crossing her arms in amusement. It's much more comfortable for me to sleep naked, and plus. Her blue-green eyes gained the familiar glazed look as she set her sights on Issei. You're much more warm and cuddly than just a plain old bed. Issei's eyes widened as his face flushed, and he gulped down a nervous lump in his throat. Riaz giggled when she saw her cowhai rush out of his room. The crimson-haired devil smiled in amusement and looked out of the window to see Issei running off somewhere. Such a special cowhai. Mount Olympus. So what exactly is your question, my grandson? Issei sighed as he and his grandfather walked across from each other. He wasn't exactly lying to Riaz when he told her that he was visiting some relatives. He just didn't tell her who he was visiting. As they walked across the hallways, Issei noticed the amount of Olympians mingling about. The young man rubbed the back of his head and looked up at his grandfather. What is this scent I keep hearing about? When I came to Kuo Academy, the devils residing there were able to track me down without any trouble, even though I suppressed my power. Zeus raised an eyebrow at his grandson before he shrugged. Well, I'm afraid I don't have an answer for that. Did you try asking the Welsh dragon? Issei nodded and crossed his arms. Brage was the one who told me about the scent in the first place. Perhaps Aphrodite knows. Issei stopped in his pace, and his eyes widened. Aunt Aphrodite. Zeus noticed his grandson stop, and the king of Olympus raised an eyebrow in puzzlement. What's with him? 30 minutes later. What do I owe this pleasure of the visit from my adorable little nephew? Issei sighed as he looked at the walls of the palace in an attempt to keep his sight away from his aunt. An unearthly beautiful woman with shoulder-length almond brown hair and golden brown eyes smiled warmly in amusement as she watched her nephew. I have a question to ask you, Aunt Aphrodite. Aphrodite chuckled as she settled herself in her bed. And I might have an answer for you if you look at me, my little nephew. Issei's eyes widened and he stiffened. Aphrodite giggled at her nephew and she put her covers up in order to cover herself in hopes to ensure Issei. I covered myself up, you can look now. Issei didn't believe his aunt's words for a second. She had pulled that trick so many times that Issei couldn't even count how many times he had been tricked. Issei. Gulping down a nervous lump in his throat, Issei slowly turned around to face his aunt, who sent him an amused smile. Now that we have the hesitance out of the way, what is your question? Rubbing the back of his head, Issei sighed. Do you know why someone like me has a scent? Aphrodite's smile disappeared and she tilted her head. Scent? Issei nodded in response and then Aphrodite widened her eyes in remembrance. Ah, scent. Well Issei, each demigod has a scent that makes them trackable by other creatures. Now since you already know you're a demigod, your scent is much stronger. Did any monsters come and attack you or anything while you were in the human world? Issei thought his aunt's question over. Up until now, he had already been fighting horrendous monsters in order to train his body. That does explain why the monsters he faced were so intent on killing him even before the training had commenced. But the devils at school didn't seem like monsters to him. They weren't monsters, were they? Issei looked up at his aunt and he rubbed the back of his head. Well, aside from training up here on Mount Olympus, no. But when I first arrived at my school, the devils who went to the same one as me were able to track me down. I noticed that most of the female devils seemed to really enjoy my scent. It's kind of unsettling. Aphrodite looked at her nephew for a moment and then she burst out laughing. Issei widened his eyes at his aunt and he looked around, trying to find out what was so funny. He was so confused right now. Calming herself down, Aphrodite relaxed into a more comfortable position and smiled at her nephew. Such a silly boy. Haven't you realized it yet, Issei? Issei blinked in confusion, unable to even respond. Aphrodite chuckled softly. Well, aside from being a cute demigod, you seem to have an almost innate sense of innocence like your Aunt Astria. Issei widened his eyes. Aunt Astria? Aphrodite smiled warmly. In the human world, she represents purity, knowledge, reason, and innocence. You seem to be similar to her, despite not being her child, Issei. Issei adopted a thoughtful look as he listened to his aunt explain another member of his family. Aphrodite's smile widened. Yes, you certainly are interesting, my little nephew. Hey, Issei. Both Issei and Aphrodite looked to see a young man wearing traveling clothes, a flat hat, and winged sandals. He held a folded letter in his hand. Issei widened his eyes, while Aphrodite smirked. Uncle Hermes. Well, if it isn't my brother. Have you come to bring me a message? Hermes, the Greek god of transitions and boundaries, smiled as he looked at Issei. Yes, but the message isn't for you, Aphrodite, it's for Issei. Issei blinked in confusion and he accepted the letter from his uncle. The young man opened the letter and his eyes widened. Uncle Hephaestus. I wonder what he wants to see me for. The Gore of Athens. Ah, Issei. You got my letter. Yeah. So what did you want to talk about? Issei crossed his arms and sat down as he listened to his uncle. Do you still have that sword I gave you? Issei blinked and he lifted his hand, the familiar sword appearing within his grasp. The black-colored devil horn-shaped sword with a pattern consisting of golden stripes gleamed. Hephaestus chuckled at the sight and got ready to explain. Issei, there is another reason I gave you this blade. In order to test if it was able to bond to your sacred gear. Issei widened his eyes. Bond? Ah, I see. Partner, summon your sacred gear. Blinking in confusion, Issei complied with a Welsh dragon and he lifted his left arm up. Dragon booster. Dragon booster. The familiar red claw-shaped gauntlet with yellow accents and green inscriptions manifested on Issei's left arm, its green jewels glowing with power. Issei raised an eyebrow and lifted his right hand up, which grasped his blade within. Combining a sword with a sacred gear, it sounds impossible. Sacred gears function according to the thoughts of the wielder, partner. If you simply wish it, then that wish shall be granted. Issei widened his eyes and he looked at his blade. He switched the blade into his left hand and held it tight. Partner, concentrate your will into the boosted gear and then sync your energy with your blade. Concentrating his energy into the blade, Issei widened his eyes when he was almost blinded by a bright flash of light. The blade began to emit a bright aura and the boosted gear appeared to be glowing in intensity. The flash gleamed even brighter, causing a pool of blinding light to escape the Agora of Athens. The light slowly faded and Issei tentatively opened his eyes and then he gasped. Ejected out of the boosted gear was his blade, gleaming from the light. Issei looked at his boosted gear and then his eyes widened. What happened to the boosted gear? The armor of the boosted gear was now an onyx black color and the jewel on top of the palm area was now a golden color. The accents were now black, but the inscriptions remained green. Issei widened his eyes further. It's like a black version of the boosted gear. It seems that the color of the blade has affected the coloration of the boosted gear. However, once you stop using the sword, the color should return to its original appearance. Issei blinked and concentrated his power once more, feeling relieved as his blade absorbed itself into his boosted gear. His sacred gear began to gain its red shade back and then the artifact returned to its original form. Humph. Issei looked up at his uncle, who smirked in amusement. So I was correct. Your boosted gear absorbed your blade. Due to this, you should be able to manipulate the power of the sword quite easily. Interesting. Training grounds. Issei stood still, with his boosted gear revealed on his left hand. He looked over to his opponent, which was a large cyclops. Issei narrowed his eyes and looked at his boosted gear. He had trained with a sword that was sealed within his sacred gear for some time now. After sealing the sword back up, the boosted gear retained the onyx black coloration, along with the golden jewel. Uncle Hephaestus said I could also use the power of the sword, even when it's sealed within. So would that mean I could use its powers as well? Perhaps. Setting his face into a serious look, Issei lifted his left arm up. A flaming aura manifested around the black boosted gear as the golden jewel glowed brightly. The aura increased in size as a meteor-like sphere of energy began to manifest from his hand. Narrowing his eyes, Issei shot the meteor-like attack towards the Cyclops, who combusted and exploded as a result. Issei's eyes widened and he looked at his black-colored boosted gear before sealing the full power of his blade, allowing his sacred gear to return to its original red color. At the park, Issei sighed and rubbed the back of his head as he sat on the bench. He tilted his head at the events that had happened today. When he returned home, he could sense the familiar auras of the devils he had come in contact with and some unfamiliar auras of fallen angels near the church. He didn't really have to come in contact with any of them, so he went to the park. Whoosh. His eyes widened as he suddenly felt a familiar energy signal. He looked up just in time to avoid a light spear, and he automatically set himself into a battle stance. God damn it. I missed it. Issei looked up to see the fallen angel he had seen yesterday, now in her true form. The uniform she had worn the day before was replaced by a black version of a S&M outfit. Issei raised an eyebrow. Why is she dressed so immodestly? She's a fallen angel, kid. What did you expect her to wear, a suit and a tie? Issei was about to reply until another light spear was sent his way from the fallen angel. Her violet eyes widened in shock when her light spear disintegrated as soon as it touched Issei. What the hell are you using your sacred gear? Issei raised an eyebrow and he tilted his head. No. The fallen angel's eyes widened further and she took a step back. Issei sighed and rubbed the back of his head. It'd be pointless to kill her. After all, it's not like she's a potential threat. With a shrug, Issei turned around to walk away and the fallen angel widened her eyes. Hey. Where the hell do you think you're going? We're not finished here. Issei widened his eyes and raised an eyebrow as he turned around to face the fallen angel. Finished with what? We haven't really done anything important here. The fallen angel gasped, and then her eyes narrowed as she charged another light spear. Shut your mouth, you. Well. What exactly are you doing, Rainer? The fallen angel was cut off when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Both Issei and the fallen angel, now named Rainer, turned around to see a man in his 20s with black hair and golden bangs. He also had 12 jet black wings that came out from his back. Rainer widened her eyes in shock. Azazel-sama. Azazel smirked and crossed his arms as he set his sights over to a confused Issei. He sent Issei a nod and smirked wider. Looks like I made it just in time to see the Welsh dragon himself. Issei widened his eyes as Azazel fluttered the 12 jet black wings from his back. Azazel smiled, chuckling in amusement. Grandson of Zeus, it's so nice to meet you. Thanks for watching this video. Part 1 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the playlist that I have created and enjoy. Link is in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.